you on the map. This is Ron Costa broadcasting live from the USA studios in Las Vegas, Nevada. And today, folks, you want to know what an investment advisory can do for you. We're going to get into that. And before we do that, let's talk and introduce Vicky Hachmala from the World Token Market. Vicky, how are you doing?
Doing excellent, Ron. Another fabulous day in Vegas. Sun is shining. People are cold in some areas, but we're enjoying 70-degree weather. And we have a very special guest, a local person from Vegas, which we don't do very often, but looking forward to our talk with our guest today.
Excellent. So let's get him on. Folks, we got Andrew Whalen. He's the CEO of Whalen Financial. Andrew, how are you today?
You know what, I'm doing well, and to piggyback off of Vicky's statement, the best part about winter in Las Vegas is we mostly see it on TV, right?
Exactly. And we always feel sorry for those people in heavy coats and mittens and gloves.
That's exactly right. But I'm very, very happy to be here today with both of you. Thanks for having me on, and I look forward to hopefully providing a little bit of education to some of your listeners and answering any kind of questions that arise.
Excellent.
Yeah, last week when the temperature here in Vegas dropped from 90 to 60 in like 24 hours, I actually told some of my friends back in New York, I said, it's so cold out here in Vegas today, I'm actually have to go out and wear a windbreaker. That's how cold it is.
I turned on my gas fireplace for the first time for one day. One day I used it.
Yeah, we don't even know what a coat is here in Vegas. That's why we live here.
So Andrew, let's start this out by, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got to be where you are, and a little bit about Whalen Advisory.
Yeah, sure. So Whalen Financial is a registered investment advisory firm. We primarily work with pre-retirees or retirees on managing their finances. So we act as a personal CFO, and what that means at Whalen Financial is anything that has a dollar sign in front of it, we want to be involved some way. So whether that is planning for retirement, making distributions through retirement, or even as simple as answering questions on refinancing a mortgage or purchasing and selling a business, we want to act as that financial coach for our clients through retirement. So I started in the industry. My grandfather was in this industry, and I was raised by my grandparents. I started trading stocks at about the age of 12 years old.
Wow.
I was fortunate enough to kind of, have my grandfather as a role model and see him act in this business. He did a lot in taxes and a little bit in financial planning. And he, like I said, he was my superhero growing up, so I wanted to be as much like him as I could, so I got into stock trading. And so I always had a passion about this overall business. After spending 4 years at Purdue University, I came back to Vegas and purchased the business from my grandfather in 2010. So since then, we've grown to about 150 to 160 million of client assets under advisory, where we are responsible for not only building the model, but also sustaining the model for their future. And we have the privilege to work with individuals, business owners, entrepreneurs, medical professionals, as well as sports athletes. So we kind of get a little bit of a different taste depending on who comes in each day, but it is an absolute privilege to be the steward of these clients' assets for the next 10 to 15 to 25 plus years.
Well, let me ask you a question, Andrew. We had this, I'm not quite sure what word I want to describe, but we had this election, and what do you think the impact of the election is on the future of the economy? I noticed that the market now is close to 30,000, and I'm just wondering, how do you think the election is going to impact the economy, and how is it going to take us into the future?
Sure. So, and not just the election, right? I mean, When life wants to throw you a curveball, they kind of do it all in 2020. It seems like. I remember in December of last year when we met with our clients and our investment advisors, we were basically hoping for a roaring 20s, right? I'm sure everybody saw the memes online about the roaring 20s coming again, and evidently it kind of took a sidestep this year. So not only do we have COVID, but we also just recently, like you said, had a presidential election. And before I get into answering that question, this comes at a basic thesis for us at our firm, where it is always going to be time in the market versus timing the market, and that's true with almost any investment that you associate yourself with. Is the time in the market. But what I know, regardless of who the president is, regardless of what Congress is going to look like come January the 5th, is that the U.S. economy has seen it all and come back from the brink almost every single time. And it's seen wars, crises, recessions, depressions. It's seen inflation, deflation, bursted bubbles, and obviously the never-ending what we call whispers and screams of the end-of-the-world scenarios. But despite all of those things, the U.S. has come back better and stronger each time. And despite all of that, the American capitalist machine was constantly creating, innovating, driving the economy forward every step of the way. So the U.S. economy, in our opinion, is like no other. And how anyone could really lose faith in that track record is a little bit beyond me and in my studies of history. So that's the backdrop. We think that the economy in the long term will always be greater 10 years from now than it is today. It's the patience to get through that 10 years and circumvent, some of those crises that causes the main pause for concern. But to address your question a little bit more directly, the country's in a torn position right now. A little bit more than 50% of people voted for Vice President Biden, and around 50% of people voted for President Trump. So what we know is that this election, much like any other one in previous history, was going to be divisive going in. And then we've got kind of this what we call this hangover effect of kind of litigation that's going to go over the next 30 days. But when we started to look at kind of the schematics of, what are the best case scenarios? What are the best case scenarios for the market? What are the best case scenarios for the economy? We think that if the Republicans can retain control of the Senate, it's almost like a Goldilocks position for the markets and the economy, regardless of who the president of the United States is. And the reason for that is because the markets, and if you remember I said just a few moments ago I'm a student of history, so the markets really like a divided government. And the reason why they like the reason they like that is because there's not so much policy swings on a pendulum to either the left side or the right side. So if we have a split Congress, then you're not going to see a lot of those maybe major market shifting, economic shifting legislative policies go through, such as the Green New Deal, such as the corporate tax increase and individual tax increase, and a lot of those regulations that were planning to be imposed on private U.S. small businesses, at least under the proposed plans of the Biden administration. So we think that going into next year, you've got a unique backdrop. You've seen the economy already start to recover from kind of what's happened from COVID. And we think that rate of recovery is indicative of how strong the foundation of the economy was prior to the pandemic. And we look at this pandemic from an economic standpoint, not a literal standpoint, but an economic standpoint, very similar to a natural disaster. So if you think of a natural disaster, it shuts everything down, and then it takes a little bit of time to rebuild. But once it's rebuilt, people come back and start to flourish again. So you've got an economy on strong footing. We're getting more and more positive news from a vaccine, which will boost consumers' confidence to get back out there. And you have to also consider the Federal Reserve, which is a big player on the economy. And the Fed has mandated that they intend to keep interest rates at or near zero for the foreseeable future, which is defined for them for about the next year to 2 years. So you're going to be coming into an economy in 2021 that has relatively stable economic foundations, you're going to get some form of stimulus, right? We know the first rule of a politician is to get reelected and then make policy. So if these politicians on the left or the right want to get reelected in the next 2 years or 4 years, they don't want to be remembered for not passing fiscal stimulus. So it's not going to be $2 trillion. It's not going to be $500 billion like the Republicans want. It'll be somewhere in between. And that much-needed boost for these 17 million people that are still unemployed is going to be a big benefactor to the overall economy, specifically if we can get it in before that Christmas season where typically spending is much more positive. So we think the economy sets up well for next year as long as there's a split government between Congress and the White House. Sorry, I can go long in the tooth, so make sure you interrupt me anytime you want.
Okay, we're going to think about doing that.
I got to tell you,
got it.
That was the most upbeat analysis of what's going on that I've heard in a long time. Every morning you wake up, it's like, oh my God, how bad is this? This is what's going to happen. And it's good to know that, based on what you just said, divisiveness is good.
Yeah, it kind of keeps everything at bay. And you have to remember, good news doesn't sell, right? It's hard to sell advertisements if you're just talking about roses and unicorns.
Well, this is true. But it's nice to hear somebody have a positive attitude, though, too, just so that it brings everything into perspective, and that not everything is bad, and next year will be better.
We have a saying. I'm sorry.
Oh, go on. You have a saying.
We just have a saying that gets back to what Vicki just said, which is optimism is the only realism. So we try to instill that not only in our clients because in this day and age with 24-hour news everywhere, it's easily to get inundated. So optimism is the only realism, at least at our firm.
That's great.
Yeah, so again, based on what you were just saying, what would you say to a company that may be interested in doing, let's say, a crowdfunding campaign, a Reg A or a Reg CF or some kind of 506 or anything that they want to do is raising money, but may be scared because they don't know what the future holds for with the economy? It sounds to me like you would advise them to go full steam ahead on something like that.
Yeah, 100%, right? I mean, I think the world changed here in the United States back in 2016 with the Jobs Act Regulation CF, right? I think that the ability to have individual entrepreneurs fund themselves in a way where you don't have to necessarily have just high net worth individuals like it was before with Reg D presents a huge opportunity to create more innovation, right? And what we know is that innovation creates productivity. Productivity leads to stronger economic growth. So at this day and age, everybody wants to talk about, hey, when the dust settles this, when the dust settles, I'll do that. When I know who the president's going to be, or when I know we're going to get a vaccine, then I will make that step. But unfortunately, some people wait so long and come up with so many other excuses to not just do the work that the time passes them by. So I would absolutely, if you have the resources or the capability or a good idea, take that idea, take it to market, because you're not going to know if it's effective unless you test it, right?
Exactly.
Whether that's through money that you're raising and capital that you're raising or through product testing. These innovations that people have in their brains do no good to anybody unless they put them to paper and actually execute. So I think that specifically in this low-yielding environment where you may be able to offer equity at a much lower stake compared to where interest rates are, that presents a very unique opportunity to individual entrepreneurs that are looking to raise capital. So I would agree with that thesis, and absolutely. Nothing should hold you back in this country from taking risk, and specifically not COVID, and specifically not who's in the White House.
And how do you
and that's why the most successful entrepreneurs and business owners are the ones that are not afraid to take the risk and go out and do, because if you sit back and wait in your comfort zone, nothing's ever going to happen. You got to take that risk, and you have to not be afraid to take the risk to be successful.
Right, and innovation in itself, which is what we're talking about through the form of entrepreneurism, innovation is the most powerful force in the global economy. I mean, it's the driving, accelerating rates of change. And when we build clients' portfolios, we have to focus on innovation because innovation triumphs over any kind of economic volatility and any kind of recession and any kind of president, maybe not on a daily basis or a monthly basis, but over a period of time. And I'm sure just like you guys know, building a business or creating a product or service isn't as easy as just going to Instagram and seeing an influencer. It takes time. And we think that innovation always will surpass any of those kind of economic crises.
Absolutely.
Andrew, how do you work with these issuers that are looking to crowdfund? I mean, do they come to you? Are you their kind of like their CFO or something like that, or some in that kind of capacity?
Yeah, so we don't do direct crowdfunding for entrepreneurs because we're a registered investment advisory firm. So we only deal with publicly traded companies. But to that question, we do get approached by individuals who have ideas looking to raise capital. But unfortunately, we've actually never experienced a full deal before. But I think It presents a very big opportunity.
Yeah, no question. Small business owners are a huge part of the investment community.
They're one of the largest contributors to the GDP of the economy. It's not these big U.S. large cap companies. I mean, even though they do contribute a large amount of share, U.S. small businesses contribute, almost 45% of the GDP in this country. And unfortunately, because of a lack of being able to pass policies in one city in this country, a lot of those businesses have struggled over the last, let's say, 8 months because of not proper funding. I mean, imagine if they took the PPP program and did a crowdfunding version of it, right?
Exactly.
Where you could go to a platform and look at, I don't know, I'm going to say Joe's Pizza, right? And you could look at an updated memorandum of kind of what they are doing as a company, their historic track records. Man, they just need, $100,000 of working capital to kind of get through. And if they get back to even where they were prior to COVID, and I get a certain equity stake in that company, that could work well for me. And then you just have to calculate the risk versus the reward.
Right, and this is why blockchain technology is the future of these smaller investors who want to be involved in maybe the pizza place that they buy their pizza from, and
right.
Here's the opportunity to tokenize that business, to issue tokens, to have their customers buy into that business and capitalize the business to make it bigger and bigger, especially now that the SEC has modified its rules to allow changes to the definitions of what accredited and non-accredited investors are, and incorporating finder's fees and commissions, and making it easier to bring people together to do business, to grow business, to make the economy better. It's exponential and cyclical.
Yeah, we think that blockchain, just in general, not any specific cryptocurrency, even though I play favoritisms with the legendary coin. We think blockchain in general is going to be one of the major 6 disruptive technologies for the next 50 years.
Absolutely. It will change the financial picture not only in the U.S. but around the world, because there's companies that have blockchain platforms that are implementing them, innovating into government operation. We know a company Horizon FinTech, which has created a blockchain technology platform to run the government of Antigua. We know the other companies that are working on voting with blockchain to make it more secure and eliminate this whole catastrophe that we just experienced. There's so much that can be done with blockchain and tokenization. I mean, cryptocurrency is one thing, tokenization is another, but...
Yeah, and with any kind of disruptive technology, it comes down to the time, right, the adoption rate. And what we've noticed over the last, 25 years is that the adoption rate of new technology has actually drastically declined. Just as an example, and then I'll get back into blockchain. It took YouTube almost 8 years to reach 1 billion users. It took TikTok, just as an example, only 3. So the adoption rate is becoming faster and faster. And this leads me back to the original point. The Internet or the information and telecommunications revolution started in 1971. It took almost 30 years to make it onto the Today Show, where they were making fun of the @ symbol, right? Why would I send an email, right?
Exactly.
If you think of blockchain starting in roughly 2008, 2009, really starting to come forward in 2010 and 11, really making it mainstream when everybody was covering Bitcoin back in 2016, 2017, right before the run up. It takes time for these things to happen, and unfortunately, because of that time that it takes, people either get complacent and say, hey, well, we'll try and adopt it, where there are early adopters, which it sounds much like yourselves, that are trying to push that envelope, which really accelerate that rate of change. But yeah, everything in the blockchain system from data security to IoT platforms to smart contracts to money transfers to digital IDs to supply chain management, even something as significant as food safety and tracing for foodborne illnesses, which could help the global economy, specifically the areas that suffer from poverty, and bring those people into an age of Internet of Things. But the problem is they can't get into the Internet of Things because they have a problem with poverty, right? So that's a huge opportunity, and it's one of our 6 main themes when we invest for clients on areas that we want to focus on, because our average client, like I said, is going to live for 25 or 30 years. So I can't just be investing our clients' assets for next year or what's going to happen next month. It's got to be what kind of significant trends over the next 10, 20, 30 years are going to be happening, because the worst thing that happens to us is that clients run out of money, which is what we don't want to happen.
True. And plus, the world is spinning so much faster. So at the time in the 70s when the Internet was developing, people were like, oh, my God, they were barely used to using a computer, much less going into the Internet or into emails or anything like that. But now people have a little bit more trust in technology, and technology just moves at warp speed. So, but I think that it all comes down to education. People have a little bit of apprehension about Bitcoin, and when you say blockchain, they automatically think Bitcoin. But blockchain is so much more than that, as you just mentioned. It can affect every aspect of a person's life. And they don't even really know that it is. But getting people to understand it, to realize it, and to not be afraid of it is the key.
Sure, and that gets back to kind of like the life cycle of technological revolutions, right? And right now with anything in that space, I think we're in the eruption space, right? And then it kind of goes into a little bit more of a frenzy and then synergy, and then when it finally matures, that's during the deployment period, typically during a technological revolution. During that maturity phase is when it's mass adopted. And I think a big key to that is not only going to be legislation, but also it's going to be adoption for some of these larger companies, right? So you've seen Square get into the space, and you've seen PayPal get into the space. You've seen Venmo start to get into those space. And I think if consumers in general can see that, then that eases their mind into more of an adoption space. Now, on the government side of things, obviously that's going to be regulations. But, we have these, what we call at our firm, these technological revolutions about every 50 years, and that's well defined back into the mid-1700s when we had the Industrial Revolution. And we think right now we are just in the early stages of what we call the age of connected intelligence, right? Where that's artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, to make us more productive, to make us smarter, to make us more interactive. And we think that blockchain is going to be one of those disruptive technologies that's in there. But at the same time, you also have to focus on artificial intelligence, cloud computing. We think 5G is going to be a monumental step forward for connectivity of devices. You see what Elon Musk is doing with Starlink to bring the internet to more people. And obviously biotechnology is the last one of the six that we really focus on because we think people are going to live longer and healthier lives, over the next 25 or 30 years.
And sometimes, you can get swept up in the technology age and what's going on and the fast movement of it. And you have to kind of stop and understand and let humanity kind of catch up to technology so that there's influx of morality into it too. Once you start talking about artificial intelligence and machines doing work for humans, you have to bring a kind of morality and evolution to balance out the evolution of humanity with the evolution of technology so that we don't cut off our nose to spite our face.
Yeah, well, there's always winners and losers, right? The telegraph, that was the loser. The winner was telephones. The horse and mule was the loser, and cars and tractors were the winners. Brick and mortar stores, at least they're trending to be, the loser of the future, more towards e-commerce. And, here's what people aren't really talking about, is, when you look at any kind of pandemic, there are drastic changes in cultural society, at least as the evolution of humans, of themselves, when we go through any kind of crisis. So whether that's 9/11 and, before you could just, run up and see your family members at the gate, now you basically have to get fully undressed and then have all the procedures when you get on the plane. And that's something that we learn to live with. So much like that, and I'm not, trying to correlate the two, but pandemics cause drastic amounts of change. And this one in particular has come at a time where the Internet of Things is becoming more and more prevalent. So just think of this for a second. What COVID is going to do at a bare minimum is it is going to accelerate the timeline of adoption of a digital landscape economy. So if you think about, the 85-year-old grandfather or grandmother that is now using Instacart to get their groceries delivered, that probably would have never used that interface ever before. Well, guess what? They now have an iPhone or or a Samsung, let's say.
Yeah.
And it's automatic.
Right. Now you've got, let's say, a 75-year-old or a 65-year-old grandparent that is now Zooming with their grandchildren because they can't go fly back east and see them. So it is bringing this generation that is kind of carried this country and also the world over the last 30 years into this disruptive range of technology. So if that generation is adopting those things, what are all of the other generations doing, right? And you have to remember the millennial generation is almost 2 times the size of the boomers generation. So they're going to have this disruptive adoption period that is only going to be further accelerated by something like COVID, and it is absolutely tragic what's transpired, and hopefully we can get through this within the next year. But when you start thinking, when we invest clients' capital, we have to think of, well, who are going to be the benefactors of this new digital landscape economy, and to that point, more people are adopting this technology.
Well, you know what? Let's kind of change the subject a little bit, and let me ask you, part of the Jobs Act was the creation of opportunity zones. Do you advise, or do you have any of your clientele investing in opportunity zones, either here in Vegas or anywhere around the country?
Yeah, so we have a few clients that have taken advantage of that privately with their own capital, just because of the attractive rates of returns that it offers. But that's really. But to answer your question, yes, we do have a few clients.
And what are they investing in? What types of opportunity zones are they investing in? Because I think a lot of people don't realize that there are urban opportunity zones primarily, but there's also a lot of rural opportunity zones where there's investment in infrastructure and investment in agriculture. So do you have like a specific opportunity zone type that you advise your clients about, or do they come to you and say, this is what I want to invest in?
Yeah, it's more of like, hey, look at this deal. Does this make sense? And in that fashion, it's mostly in the low income and undercapitalized communities. So you could think in the Las Vegas area, maybe down east of the 15. Right, in that area on towards Charleston and those types of places, as well as North Las Vegas. So it's mostly some form of residential or multifamily investment.
Nice. Well, let me ask you, if there are people out there who may be interested in what you're talking about, maybe need some financial guidance, that kind of stuff, and want to contact you, what's the best way for them to reach you, Andrew?
Yeah, so they can shoot us an email, info@whalenfinancial.com. They can call our toll-free number, which is 866-600-3030, or our local line, 702-878-3900.
Great. I'm really psyched about this podcast when we're talking about adoptive technologies, because I remember the worst prediction I've ever made in my life was years ago when I said text messaging, that'll never catch on. It's
very similar, and I think only a reflection of past history do we actually have the ability to see this, right? Where and in the moment it's very difficult, right? And it takes a forward-thinking mindset. So our second mantra that we live by at this firm is, if you can't see a positive future outcome, you're never going to be in your investments long enough to ever achieve one. And what that gets to is seeing the bright side of every kind of opportunity or disopportunity, and seeing where you can, take advantage of those types of items. But absolutely, but there's also been hits and misses, right? I mean, there's plenty of technological advances that didn't really go anywhere, and I'm sure I purchased a few of them, and they're somewhere in my garage now.
Well, it would all be nice to have a Back to the Future 2 crystal ball, right?
Oh, of course, yeah. Well, especially the sports book pages. I really like that one,
Yes, especially living in Vegas, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I got to tell you, I feel so much better about the world in general after this podcast. Vicki, how about you? What do you think?
I think it's upbeat, and I have to say, Andrew, Betsy was right. Now, maybe you don't really walk on water, but you certainly do have the knowledge necessary to help your clients get from here to there in a better way, in a positive way, with a great outlook on the future. And that, I think, is so important. So important. You can't do anything if you don't know you're going to be successful. And if you don't have that drive to be successful, you can't. And this is why they need you, to make sure that they maintain it.
It's been an absolute pleasure to spend time with both of you. Like I said earlier, I can talk about this stuff all day. I enjoy it. It's my passion. And I think that is a key drive to success in anything that you do is enjoy what you're doing.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't feel like work. But there is a tremendous amount of opportunity for every calendar day that goes by, and the missed opportunities of inaction are the real negatives of prosperity.
Absolutely. If you're afraid to wake up in the morning, you're never going to go anyplace. You're just stuck.
That's a perfect way to close the podcast. So, Andrew, again, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. Really appreciate your time and your input. And Vicki, thanks for co-hosting this with me as well. And folks out there, you're listening to the Mappable USA podcast over at mappableusa.com. If you go to that website, you can scroll down the homepage. You'll see all our syndication sources. Just pick the one you like best and subscribe, and you'll never miss another episode. If you want to be a guest on the show like Andrew was today, there's a guest tab there on the website. Click on that, fill it out. We'll see what we do about getting you on the show. And lastly, if you like what you heard, send us an email, info@mappableusa.com, or just make a comment on the page that you're listening to this on right now. So thanks for all your support. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on another Mappable USA podcast. Have a great week, everyone.